Could we see a potential blockbuster deal between the Winnipeg Jets and the Los Angeles Kings? The stars are aligning that there might be a good fit to pull off a major trade this offseason. Plus, we have the latest rumors on the Flames, Oilers, and Philadelphia Flyers. Plus, we have a new head coach in Calgary. We have a signing in San Jose, and other news from around the league, including another update on the Sens ownership saga. All that and more coming up next. Welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot to cover. We're going to kick things off with the news today in Calgary. They finally have themselves a new head coach and his longtime assistant, Ryan Huska. He was formally announced today by GM Craig Conroy. The search is over. They are pretty confident in their choice, and I think they've made themselves a good one here. Huska's been around for quite some time and coached a variety of levels. He's put in his time in the minors and junior and been, obviously a fairly long time NHL assistant with the Flames. He's mostly been a D coach and a PK coach. So obviously he's got a lot of good experience there. That's going to help him be a successful head coach. They did actually talk as well, because there was a lot of talk about Mitch Love, who's been the American Hockey League Calgary Wranglers head coach. And he's been multiple time coach of the year down there. Many people feel like he doesn't really have anything more to prove at the American Hockey League level. They were asked, and Craig Conroy did answer the question why they went with Huska over Mitch Love. And essentially, he said that he feels like Mitch needs more NHL time. He said it's a major difference between an American Hockey League head coach and an NHL head coach, and that he thinks that before he gets an NHL head coaching opportunity, he should probably get to the NHL level as an assistant first. So there is some talk, we don't know yet, that the Flames may talk to him about moving up to the NHL and being part of Ryan Huska's staff. That is a possibility. So we'll see where that goes. I mean, Huska's been there a long time. Like I said, he's been under 3 different head coaches, so he's gotten a variety of things that he's probably learned and kind of pulled from all these guys. He was there during the Bill Peters era, Jeff Ward, and Daryl Sutter. Like I said, he's put in his dues. Based on my knowledge of Huska and when I look at his resume, I think they've got themselves a pretty good candidate here. So I think they're in pretty good hands. Of course, they're certainly going to be planning to incorporate a lot more youth into their lineup. They certainly want to make sure that young players are going to get every opportunity. And he certainly seems very committed to doing that. So it's going to be interesting to see how these Flames roster looks in the fall, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the video. Obviously, they have a lot of players that have to have a decision made of whether or not they're going to extend or possibly be traded or whatnot, because they have a lot of players that are eligible for extensions, and many of which expressed potential interest to move on at the end of the season. But of course, that was before all these changes were made, so they have to check with all these players, kind of see who's interested in staying, who's not, who might want to move, what they can get on the market for all these guys, and make decisions. I think that there's bound to be probably a couple of the veterans that are expiring or pending UFAs, you could call them, that might extend and stay. But I think there's going to be at least a few of them that do end up getting moved after all. So good on Calgary making a good choice on Huska. There is word tonight as well that the Rangers are, I guess you could say, close, or we're expecting them to name Peter Laviolette to be the new head coach on the Big Apple. We don't have that confirmed just yet, but I've seen different reports from 2 or 3 different well-respected writers and reporters out there that have this information saying that is what's expected, that the announcement could be coming here in the next few days. I kind of wonder if what was going on in New York is they talked about Laviolette, talked about John Hines, and I kind of wonder if they were watching what's going on in Toronto, because there was a lot of word before that Chris Drury was very curious to see if Sheldon Keefe was going to become available in Toronto. Of course, after the relationship ended with Kyle Dubas and he moved on, they brought in Brad Treliving, and we still don't know if Sheldon Keefe is for sure staying to be the head coach. It's looking that way, but we don't know. And on that front, Elliot Friedman on his latest podcast this morning did touch on Sheldon Keefe. They were talking about what they knew on that front, and Elliot said that he doesn't really know a whole lot. It's kind of hard to say. He said what he decided to try to do is to try to see if he could find out if the Leafs were interviewing or talking to anybody else for that job. That would give them a good idea if they're at least having second thoughts or trying to see what else is out there. And he has not been able to confirm that they've had conversations or interviewed anybody else for the position. So that kind of leads everybody to still think that their odds are that Sheldon Keefe stays. But again, until Treliving decides to announce something, we don't really know that for certain. I would hope that they wouldn't take too long to make a decision, especially if for some reason Keep is let go, that he has, some kind of an opportunity to find work. Because at this point, if the Rangers move ahead with Laviolette, then there won't be any head coaching gigs left. He'd have to probably wait around, either take a job as an assistant, or he'd have to sit on the sidelines and kind of wait for next season to start and see if something opens up, if somebody ends up getting fired, partway through the season or something like that. So we'll see what happens, but that's what we know when it comes to those head coaching positions. On a goalie coach position in Columbus, of course, they did have Manny Legacy there for a long time. He was let go recently, and they've found his replacement, and that's former Finnish NHL goaltender Nicholas Backstrom. He's going to be joining the Blue Jackets as a new goalie coach. Of course, Nicholas Backstrom, not the same guy who plays for the Washington Capitals. Clearly, if you're old enough to remember, there was a goaltender, the same name, mostly played in the Minnesota Wild organization. Was a long time, fairly successful NHL goalie. So he will be the new goalie coach there in CBJ. Now, as I mentioned, we got some more information again on the Ottawa Senators sales situation. It's become so redundant. I know a lot of writers are tired of writing about it. I'm getting kind of tired of talking about it. It's one of those things that you kind of just want to be like, okay, it's done. Here's the owners. What's next? Type of thing. But word now has surfaced between Elliotte Friedman and a few other reporters that one of the things holding things up is apparently the Melnyk family, or I guess the Eugene's daughters, that hold the ownership stake in the team right now, are looking for one of the buyers, whoever's going to buy the team, to cover capital gains taxes. That's apparently one of the sticking points that seems to be an issue. And to be honest, this is kind of ridiculous and completely unheard of. Now, the thing here is to consider this. The capital gains taxes are going to be fairly substantial because it's based on what it was paid for. Okay, you're going to go by what was originally the purchase price and what it's being sold for. So Eugene Melnyk only paid just shy of $93 million back, I think it was 2003 when he bought the team. So in 20 years, we're talking about a sale around, it's probably not going to be $1 billion anymore. It's probably going to be like 950 range. But still, that is 10 times the money, right? So that's a substantial capital gains tax that they're going to have to pay, and they're trying to see if they can get the buyer to cover that, which, I mean, if that's true, that is absolutely ridiculous. So we'll see on that front if that turns out to be a sticking point. Word is right now, it's between Michael Andlauer and the Kimmel family. Some feel Andlauer is the lead horse here. Some feel the Kimmel family is. It's really hard to settle and say who for sure has the best chance to walk away to be the owners of the Senators here when all said and done. But yeah, I mean, another part of this as well that's kind of complicated things is that the Sens the Melnyk girls want to retain 10% as like a heritage piece here to honor their father. I know that was Eugene's wishes, that they at least always maintain some ownership of the franchise. So they want to own 10%, and they want to make sure that as the value changes over time, if the new majority owner sells their stake down the road, that their shares don't change, that they still own 10%. And it's just kind of a little bit complicated. That should be a little bit easier to overcome and figure and sort out, but it's the capital gains stuff that seems to be holding things up. I mean, at the end of the day, this team has a good amount of debt as well. It's rumored to be somewhere around $300 to $400 million in debt that the team is carrying. So clearly, I just can't imagine them saying, yes, we're selling this franchise for 10 times what our father paid for it, and we want you to pay our capital gains taxes. Like that, I don't know. It's just absolutely ridiculous. And I hope at some point here in the short term, the league steps in and just figures out a way to help them get this done and move on, because it's getting ridiculous. Now, one thing as well that came up, and Elliotte Friedman had information on his podcast, of course, there's the Apostolopoulos family, a billionaire out of Toronto, Steve Apostolopoulos, who's been the main, face of the group that was looking to make a purchase here that Sens as well. And they also recently tried to buy the Washington Commanders of the NFL. If you look online and research them, it says he's worth about $6 billion, but apparently one of the writers with Forbes magazine that covers a lot of this stuff says they have good intel, good sources that says that they don't have that kind of money And that's why his bid failed with the NFL to buy the Commanders as well. And it's really a case of, can't really make it work, even though you can make that as a bid, but they can't back it up. And that's why they said that the bid was a joke, and that nobody really ever should have taken it seriously. So when we've heard recently that Apostolopoulos left the situation and decided to pull out, a lot of people were upset, thinking the team is going to sell for less money now. The Sens board and the Melnick girls are going to be regretting, the fact that he's going to be out of the picture and all this. But well, if the Forbes intel is true, then they won't be. So I don't know. This is just really becoming quite the sideshow here, and I just hope that the NHL can step in and help them get everything sorted. Because I know from a Sens fan perspective, they've dealt with enough. The fan base has dealt with enough stuff throughout the tenure of Eugene Melnick being the owner of that team, that they need to move on from this, and they just need to get this sale done and get an ownership group in place that can not have everything look so sketchy and ridiculous all the time, because it's really hurting, just the overall feel of how this is going to go. A lot of fans have been excited to get a new group in there with some money and deep pockets and spend to the cap and take this team who's got a lot of young talent to the next level. And then when you hear all these things going on behind the scenes, it's a little bit demoralizing. It just kind of makes you wonder if it's ever going to come to be. So we'll see what happens there. But that's the latest on that situation. Now, on some of the trade talk around the NHL, I want to touch on a few things. One, apparently the Edmonton Oilers do have real serious interest in Flyers forward Travis Konecny. Now, again, when it comes to Travis Konecny and Scott Laughton, who we're going to touch on here in a moment as well, I'm not sure the Flyers really are pushing to trade either player. We know that they need to keep a few veterans around to navigate this rebuild that they're going through, and be good leaders and pros for the young kids that are going to be getting more of a substantial role because of where things are going to be. And, they have to have some leaders around. They could be those guys. They like them. They're content. They had good seasons this past year. And so they're not really actively trying to trade them. But teams are calling because they know they're rebuilding, and they know that there's not much out there, if much of anything really, that would be considered untouchable for Daniel Briere and the Flyers. So they're trying to get their hands on some of these guys that they obviously like. The Flyers, and been getting a lot of talk apparently from the Oilers on Konecny. So, of course, it's believed that, even though I don't think it's reached a point now where they've made offers or anything like that, but it's believed that the Oilers would build a package around young defenseman Philip Broberg, that he would probably be the centerpiece in an offer. They'd probably looking at putting a draft pick. They'd probably try to put Kailer Yamamoto in there. I don't know if the Flyers would go for that. Yamamoto might be a buyout candidate if he's not dealt ahead of the draft here before the buyout window opens, but we'll see. But Broberg would be an interesting young prospect going back the other way. That would probably intrigue Philadelphia, I would think. I think that'd be okay as a starting point. I don't know how much more they'd have to add to it, but we'll see if things get serious on that front or not. It very well could be a draft day trade, because the Oilers might have to put some picks in there to make the Flyers really think seriously. There are some other prospects in the system that might really cause them to really take a step back and think about it as well. And when it comes to Scott Laughton, yesterday we talked about the connection to the Ottawa Senators, that they're one of the teams that apparently expressed interest. But I know on the 32 Thoughts podcast today, they were wondering if the Toronto Maple Leafs might be one of those teams as well. Now, the Leafs apparently were close to trading for Laughton in the past before he signed his contract extension. Apparently, and there's a long history there of interest. However, there's no longer Kyle Dubas in place, right? So they have a new GM, and it's hard to say if Brad Treliving would feel the same way as Dubas did. Of course, Dubas now being in Pittsburgh, being the arch rival of the Flyers, you got to wonder if he might inquire as well. But you'd rarely see a trade between the two teams from Pennsylvania. But in Toronto, if there is interest, they talked about the possibility of Nick Robertson maybe being included, and the fact that Robertson might want a fresh start. He's gone through some injuries. And they said that they believe there's a lot of teams that have had interest in Robertson. If the Leafs want to trade with them, they don't know if teams have changed their mind or feel any differently now that he's had a couple of injuries, and a significant one at that. But certainly somebody to kind of watch as well. I mean, Laughton could be a good fit on a variety of teams. He's got a good contract, well-respected player, good teammate. And again, I'm not sure that they're really going to push to trade him, but if they get a good offer, and Friedman says that he believes, based on what he's being told, that there's enough interest out there, he thinks the odds of them getting an offer that they really need to accept are high. So he feels that the odds of a deal getting done are pretty good, but of course it's not a given. But I know I've seen some, like for the Ottawa connections, I know I've seen some Ottawa media talking about it and saying, well, they would consider Connor Brown, who's a longtime Senator, a comparable player to Lawton. They traded him last offseason for a second-round pick. Now, the word is that Lawton, the Flyers, were already offered a late first-round pick and said no. So they're going to want a higher first-rounder. And like, well, if you think about Connor Brown, what he was traded for, that to me says that maybe you shouldn't offer anything higher. And if the Flyers insist on having that high of a price tag, then maybe it's just not going to work out and maybe you should walk away. And if you want a comparable player, Connor Brown's now an unrestricted free agent. Maybe you sign him and you go about things on a different concept. I mean, obviously Connor Brown also has ties to the Sens and the Leafs, playing previously for both teams after being traded to the Capitals last year, played a handful of games, got a season-ending injury, and then was out the rest of the year. So we'll see what happens for Brown as a future, unrestricted free agent coming up here. But again, I guess maybe some good intel there to suggest that the price tag on Lawton is really high, and it may not be worth paying it depending on what else is available out there. Now, when it comes to the Calgary Flames, as I mentioned, it's going to be interesting to see how they proceed here. I know Friedman on the Saturday night broadcast of the Hockey Night in Canada of the Stanley Cup Final talked on the intermission that Calgary could be just as interesting of a team to watch as Winnipeg. A lot of their players could be moved that are pending UFAs, like Noah Hannafin, he said, was getting a lot of attention. Talks again, mentioned about, obviously looking at Backlund, Toffoli, Lindholm, Tanev. Belief is that none of them are going to go into the season as a pending UFA. That they're either going to negotiate an extension and sign them and plan for them to be a part of the team's future, or they're going to be dealt. And some of these players did express interest to be traded prior to the changes that we've seen in Calgary at the end of the year. Of course, they mostly were, I think their biggest concern was Daryl Sutter, and of course he's not in the picture anymore, so it's hard to say how they all feel about it. But it is believed, from what Friedman was saying, that at least Hanfin, maybe others, are kind of weighing out other opportunities that they might want to take part in, and other teams that might be attracted to them here in free agency. So if they don't for sure want to stay, then expect the Flames to look for some trades, and Craig Conroy will likely get busy. But I would suspect you're going to bound to see at least a couple of these pending UFAs dealt sometime between now and the NHL draft. Now, as I mentioned, could we see a blockbuster deal between the Jets and the Kings? And I think it's a real possibility that, based on what Friedman has been saying today, and we're going to incorporate some intel from Friedman and from Frank Cervelli of DailyFaceoff.com. Now, Friedman talked about on the podcast that he believes the LA Kings are going to go hard after Dubois. So if the LA Kings really want to do that, they have the assets to make Winnipeg a very attractive offer. There's no doubt. Now, will Dubois do a sign and trade with them is the big question. Now, it's believed that Dubois gave the Jets a list of teams that he would consider signing a long-term deal with. That there's around, I think it's about 5 teams that he said he would do that. It's believed Montreal is right at the top of that list. And, of course, at the end of the day, if he doesn't want to do a contract with whatever team they propose, he doesn't have to. And it's going to cause the deal to either go through or not go through. But, at the end of the day, he's got a lot of control. So we'll see how things work out. But obviously, the LA Kings, they only have Anze Kopitar under contract for another year. Not to say that he won't re-up and stay, but of course, his cap hit will likely change. So they're at a point where adding a top young center like Dubois might not be the worst thing in the world. They have Philip Deneau under contract for a while yet. Good two-way center. Kopitar will be around for a while as well. And if they have Kopitar, Dubois, and Deneau down the middle, 1, 2, 3, that's pretty darn deep down the middle. And that's one of the big ways you win Stanley Cups, is having a really deep, strong core of centermen. So certainly I understand the interest. That makes a lot of sense. There's some talk that LA, obviously has a lot of prospects and younger players that could be attractive to Winnipeg. Now, Frank Cervelli also says he believes that Connor Hellebuyck, for his trade that's likely going to happen, that LA makes the most sense for him as well, considering that they view their window to win just kind of opening up here, and it might be a place where Hellebuyck would consider extending for a few years. It's not out of the realm of possibilities that they're going to trade for a goalie anyway. They traded for Korpisalo at the deadline. They brought him in. He didn't do too bad. But right now, indications are that they haven't really had any real conversations about extending. So that tells us that they're exploring the market to bring in something that they could feel would be even better than Korpisalo. So I think good chance Korpisalo hits the market as a UFA. They have Phoenix Copley under contract on a cheap amount for the next couple of years. They get a stand to bring in a veteran who's available, and there's enough of them out there that we've talked about in the trade market. Now, of course, Hellebuyck would be a very interesting choice, but can you imagine if the Jets traded Hellebuyck and Dubois to the Los Angeles Kings? They'd be demanding a pretty big package coming back, but look at some of the options that they would be able to put in there. You can look at Sean Durzi on the blue line. That's a defenseman I think that Winnipeg would be very interested in. Gabe Vilardi, solid young centerman. Arthur Kaliev, scoring winger. He's kind of been in and out of the doghouse in LA, but has a lot of potential. And the American Freeman even wondered about what this would mean for Quinton Byfield. Now, they didn't say for sure that they thought that LA would trade him or anything like that, but they wondered what it would mean for his future. And, would they think of this? They said basically, LA has had a lot of prospects that they've drafted since they started rebuilding a number of years ago. And you can only block out your prospects so long before you have to either give them the job to play in your, where they're slotted, so top 6 in this case, or you move them. And, at what point do they do that with Byfield? It doesn't mean that they have to do that just yet, but you got to think he's going to be getting antsy for a chance to play a role as a top 6 center. If they get Dubois signed for a long-term deal, I'm sure that that's a name at the very least that Winnipeg is going to bring up. But can you imagine if they offered a package of Byfield, Durzi, Vilardi, Cal? I'm not saying they're going to put all of them in there, but some combination of all those guys. If they have, there's a lot of young players there that Winnipeg would be very, very interested in. They could get themselves, 2 or 3 really good players. I mean, if you think about it, Dubois or Hellebuyck on their own is going to command at least a couple of those players if they're going to do more players than picks. There's other players as well. I believe that LA would prefer to keep Grant Clark, but at least one defenseman. Like you get Durzi. I think Bjornfoot would probably be available. Maybe Spence. There could be others that they would look at. They said you got some centermen like Durzi, or not Durzi, Vilardi, sorry, and Byfield. Kaliev was a scoring winger. There's some options there that LA could certainly consider. I know Victor Arvidsson's name has been brought up from a cap perspective. That might be something they have to look at as well to take in that much salary, because it's believed that Dubois is going to want a contract around somewhere between $8.75 and $9 million. So it's going to be a long-term deal. 8 years is what he wants. So he'll do the sign and trade with Winnipeg. So the team getting him is going to have him for 8 years, which is going to put his price tag up, which is good for Winnipeg's sake. So it does make a lot of sense. LA's got a ton of young players that could be interested here. The Jets have the veteran pieces that LA probably wants to kind of try to push themselves over the top to have a better chance of winning a Stanley Cup in the next couple of years. But can you see this trade going down? What do you think for sure Winnipeg would want from LA to make it work? I think that the Shovel Dayoff's definitely going to be asking about guys like Byfield, Vilardi, Durzi. But what combination of that is it going to take to get these 2 star players out of Winnipeg? Let me know your thoughts on that and more down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.